I would say that it's just as important to schedule time in your calendar to read the research as it is for, let's say, an RBT to build rapport with a client.
I've seen situations where people think they're doing the right thing and they're just not. Or a protocol has been written and it's so tight, if you will, but it doesn't take into consideration the real world.
All right, guys, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Beyond the Science. I'm your host, Jeron Trotman, and today's another special edition of President's Corner, all right, where we spotlight leaders in the field shaping the future of behavior analysts. Now, today's topic is timely. We're going to be talking about elevating ABA practice through training and research in the literature. But before we dive in, we want to give a huge thank you to Behavior Development Solutions. Some of you guys know them as BDS. For decades, BDS has been the gold standard of ABA in education, providing powerful learning tools for practitioners at every stage. Whether you're preparing for the BCBA exam or building clinical skills, BDS is quality and innovation at its best. Learn more at bds.com, okay? So today I'm honored, and we've been having this conversation for a while, guys, to be joined by two outstanding leaders in our field. I'm going to introduce you guys for our listeners who don't know. Dr. Stephen Eversole is the founder of BDS. He's dedicated his career to raising the standards of ABA training and professional practice. And we're also joined by Dr. Nicole Bank, BCBA, and research librarian, whose work is helping behavior analysts stay sharp, stay current, and stay deeply connected to the science that defines our field. Okay, so together we're going to explore this foundational training that we've been talking about, active research literacy, and talk about, how we can kind of have a productive conversation between these two. And when we first started talking about this, I kind of had hit Steve up and we were talking about, hey, you want to come on the podcast? And then Steve was like, well, I know Nicole and she's, does our book club. So we started having conversations about, hey, how can we maybe kind of merge the things that you guys are doing and have this conversation? So welcome to the show, guys.
Yeah, great to be here.
How you guys feeling about Texas ABA so far? You guys enjoying it?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great conference.
Yeah, you guys been to any talks? Any favorite talks? Anything going on?
I was in ethics talks all day.
Okay.
So it was some deep stuff.
The state of our field
Yeah.
and ethics.
So needed.
Heavy.
Yes.
Heavy, but
Yes.
definitely needed. And hopefully we can get into a little bit of ethical considerations today for us as well.
Agreed.
What about you, Steve? What have you been up to? I know you have the booth here.
Yeah, I've been chained to the booth for the most
chained to
part,
the
but yeah.
Yeah, and I know we're in your home state. Are you from Texas?
I'm not originally from
Okay.
Texas, but I do live in Texas now.
You live in Texas now. You're
Yes.
from Colorado.
I am,
Okay.
yeah.
Which
Yes.
was it better in Texas or?
They both have their pros and cons.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. You got family here.
No, I have family all in Colorado.
Oh, Colorado's the place to be there. That's where family's where it's at. That's where it's to go. And Steve, I know you were in Florida.
In
right?
Florida, we moved there 4 years ago from Connecticut. Was up there for over 20 years, but I was raised in Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh. I love it. I love Pittsburgh. I used to, we played Duquesne a couple of times when I was basketball
yeah.
and I went out there. And I actually love it's just a really gritty city though. Like it's awesome. A lot of those people stay together. They love their sports out there.
Yes,
They love their sports out there.
Yeah, you got to wear your Pittsburgh Pirate or Pittsburgh Steelers or
Yes.
Pittsburgh Penguin paraphernalia in order to get into the city.
Yeah. They'll kick you out.
Yeah, they'll kick you out, right?
Okay, guys, to kick these off, I want to pose more of like a big picture question to both of you guys. And one of you guys can go, you guys can take this one. But let's kind of dive into why it's critical for ABA practitioners to combine strong foundational training with ongoing engagement with the literature to ensure high quality practice. Either one of you guys can take that one.
I'll start. Here's the thing. Well, here's one reason. But I think it's an important reason. When you are in practice, you are working on a team, and you have to be persuasive. You have to be, as I believe John Bailey said once, you got to be the smartest person in the room. And you do that by knowing the literature, and the science in general. Unless you're doing that, you're going to be, just kind of agreeing with other people say, or disagreeing and not having a good reason to have your position. So you really need to be proficient in the literature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think high quality training includes learning how to engage with the literature, and the literature provides multiple exemplars of our principles in action.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how you get to know those fundamental principles and learn how to apply them in your own professional setting, however, whatever that ends up being. You learn about the underlying principles, then you read about them in action in the literature, and we're always learning about those principles. That is a dynamic process for our science. Our science is progressive, and if you aren't reading about it constantly, or at least staying in touch with it, then you're out of touch and you're not growing with the science.
Yeah.
The science is going to outgrow you.
Yeah.
And I would say there's two reasons to be reading the literature in addition to what I said a minute ago, and that is you need to read it enough to continue to maintain your repertoire of understanding how to read complex articles.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's one reason. Another reason is, just for clinical utility. You're going to run into problems, clinical problems that you come across a problem. Oh man, I got to go see what's in the literature. And so you go to find the literature, and you might not necessarily need to read the whole article, but you need to, find that golden nugget that I like to say.
Yeah.
There's something that they did in the procedure. There's something that they did in the data collection or whatever that is just, that's the key. That's what I need for this client. A lot of times you don't have to totally devour the entire article.
Mm-hmm. And that's an important thing to point out for our listeners who are listening. Like Steve said, being able to not necessarily every time have to read the entire article, but finding what you may need for that consultation, that client is important. Because we know obviously consuming literature can sometimes be time consuming. I think we'll dive into that a little bit today with, maybe some barriers with staying, up to date on the literature. But I think it's important to be able to stay up to date, to be able to look at the literature, to keep your brain going, so like you said, to have that repertoire there, to be able to see, everything that's going on. So great points by both of you. Now, Steve, I want to start with you about talking about strong foundational training for ABA practitioners. What do you believe are the most critical components for both exam success, which I'm sure you've seen, and thriving for real world practice?
Well, first of all, let me mention. There's two ways to look at this. One is and I can't help this given that what we do is help people pass the BCBA exam.
Mm-hmm.
I got to answer it on those along those lines.
Okay.
And that is you got to be fluent in the principles. You got to be able to discriminate good examples of concepts from bad examples, and that's what we do in our 4,000 plus questions that we do, is we teach that sort of discrimination. And you got to focus on not only your strengths, but your weak areas. And for a lot of people that are preparing for the exam, that has to do with the experimental design. I'd say that's one of the more difficult areas that people have trouble in. Okay, so that's for the exam. Now, for practice, to be a good practitioner, you need to have all of what I just said, plus you need to be able to apply it. And you do that. It's one thing to talk about applying it. That's good, and you need that for the exam because the exam is largely application. But in practice, you need to actually do it. You have to actually apply it. And when it comes to training that, sometimes it's not practical or realistic to have somebody actually demonstrate a skill. So the next best thing is a BST model, where you're, behavior skills model, where you're putting them through through different practices of carrying out different procedures and analyzing and so on.
Yeah, and I mean, Steve, you've been around. Obviously, you have a lot of wisdom, and you kind of seen the field evolve. Do you have any examples or real world examples of how strong training or gaps in training have impacted client outcomes?
I've seen both really good training and I've seen not so good training. The good training is that which closely follows a protocol that's well written, well thought out. Mm-hmm. And I've also seen training that is, or I should say practice, I guess, that is just kind of sloppy. And you could get away with a certain degree of sloppiness in implementing procedures, but if it gets too sloppy, then the person isn't going to learn. Mm-hmm. And I like to think of carrying out a procedure as every if we're talking, say, discrete trial training, for instance, every time you present that SD, you're presenting a learning opportunity. And if you screw up the prompt or screw up the consequence to whatever the response is to that SD, the person has learned something. They may have, and if you've done it right, then they've learned something right. Mm-hmm. If they've screwed it up, then chances are you've just taught them wrong, or they've just learned the wrong thing. So you could get away with some of that slop, but if it gets too bad, then the person doesn't make much progress. Unfortunately, I've seen situations where people think they're doing the right thing and they're just not. Mm. Or a protocol has been written and it's so tight, if you will, but it doesn't take into consideration the real world. I remember a program was teaching somebody to set a table, and it was very nicely written, but it didn't take into consideration the fact that there were 3 or 4 other clients in the room that were going to be doing other things, and it's like it's not realistic to have the learner that you're focusing on do something, try to get them to do something in a situation where there's all this chaos. And then you had mentioned ethical, so we could touch on ethical. Yeah. There was this one training that I went to. It was some sort of crisis management training. And the person who was teaching it wasn't a BCBA. It was a kind of lower down trainer that somebody gave them this training and said this is how you do it. But part of the training said in a crisis to get a client. These were adults with developmental disabilities. They said, if you have to get somebody out of a situation, you tell them whatever you have to get them out of that situation, even if it means lying to them. Mm. And I just wanted to crawl under the table when I heard them say you should lie to a client, because if you do that, you lose credibility, and so that's a negative example there. Probably one of the worst I've seen.
No, Steve, I appreciate you sharing that. So we have shaping, precision, reinforcement, sloppy teaching. Guys, we're listening to that coming to you live from Steve, giving us some nuggets there. I wanted to transition to Nicole from your perspective. How can we as practitioners or people listening now, how can we stay engaged with the research? How can we help practitioners solidify that foundational training?
Yeah, I guess, if I were to provide some guidance, it's find something that you're excited about and read about that. Find a level that's accessible to you, be it, some of our Some of our journals are more readable than others. Some are, don't start with a 37-page paper if research is not your thing. But when I took piano lessons as a kid, I was always so much better at the songs that I wanted to hear, right, than the songs that my mom wanted me to play. So, because it was reinforcing for my own enjoyment to hear that tune, right? So, if you're into, if you think that shaping is a really cool technology that you see in your workplace, then read about examples of shaping, other shaping. Stimulus control is amazing. And reading some lit reviews on, the depth and the scope of what we know about stimulus control, or populations, or if DEI and ethics is what you're really into, then read some of those papers, right? Read some stuff that's automatically reinforcing for a while. And I'll tell you, you read one paper, it won't answer any of your questions. It will make more questions, which is fine, I think. And one paper will always give you at least 10 more papers to read, right? So you read the one and then you're like, okay, I can manage this. Pick one out of that reference section to keep diving and just keep going.
Yeah, I love that. And that kind of resonated with me too, is finding those things that are stimulating for you and that are automatically reinforcing.
Yes.
It's going to keep you more motivated to keep wanting to read. And I like that you mentioned it's going to give you 10 more articles because you're going to go to your reference section, find out those references, and then you want to go read some more on that. And read people who've done more research on that. So no, really, really good points. Before we move on to our next session, I just want to give another huge shout out to BDS for sponsoring today's episode. Guys, if you're looking for more than just test prep, if you want true clinical mastery, BDS has you covered with resources, journals, and innovative tools. So check out everything they offer at bds.com. You guys don't want to miss that. Now, Nicole, I want to dive a little bit deeper, into your area of expertise, which is research literacy. Okay. So what are some of those biggest challenges practitioners face when they're trying to stay connected to the research?
Yeah, great question. So one is having the research be reinforcing. As we're diving into this area, we're discovering that not every practitioner has equal excitement over the literature, and that's okay, but it's a skill that has to develop over time, and some people are more advanced than others. So there's not a universal skill set in terms of the what do we want to say, like the palatability of our research. So that's one barrier, just trying to figure out where you land on that spectrum. Nobody has enough time to do anything these days. So reading the research takes time, and that is definitely a barrier. When you don't work for a university or you aren't a student anymore, then the resources that you have for reading the academic literature dries up so quickly. And I don't think that people understand that resource is limited when you're a practitioner. I don't think we talk about it enough, and I think we need to. The metaphor that I use in some of the workshops and the talks that I give is when you're a university student, you have access to every filing cabinet of scholarly literature available, and you can just pull the drawers out and just start swimming in all of those articles. You can open the file folders, you can read it all, you can see all the pictures, you can download it. When you graduate and you leave your university, if your university doesn't have a program, some do, but not every university has like an alumni library connection program. If you lose that, the file folders are there, or the file cabinets are there, which is so frustrating because the drawers won't open. Some drawers will open and you can pull the file folder out, but you can't open it and read it. You're like, this is what I want, but I can't read it.
Unless you pay for it.
Unless you pay for it, yes. So they're harder to find, they're harder to read, and you're not in a culture of scholarly discourse anymore, right? You're talking to parents, you're talking to administrators, you're working with RBTs, and your verbal community changes. And that can make it very hard to keep thinking about the scholarly aspect of our science, just the scientific aspect, I guess I'll call it, and staying in that verbal community and keeping that repertoire stretching. And I love the metaphor of ethical fitness, where it is a muscle that you have to build and you have to practice and you just keep using. And I think, research literacy fitness is the same. It's not a goal that you will ever obtain. It's like a muscle you have to work out.
Yeah. That really resonates with me because I feel like far too often, especially as practitioners, as BAs, we kind of fall into that trap. So we may pass, and then life just gets so busy, right? You don't have time there's a lot of barriers in place for you to be able to engage in that at the frequency and duration that you once were, So can you speak a little bit about some practical strategies or tools that, behavior analysts can do to kind of stay engaged on a more regular basis to help their professional growth?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think find yourself a community, some folks around you that talk scholarly literature or that just like push you in that area. So find a community. Podcasts are great, right? Find a smart podcast that keeps you thinking about, right? It just keeps the language about the science fresh, right? Yeah. I would say that it's just as important to schedule time in your calendar to read the research as it is for, let's say, an RBT to build rapport with a client or for, a consultant to take a step back and just do some like baseline. I think it's important to schedule time with the literature. And I know that we do these, we do conferences and we do professional development type activities, and those are great, but I think it's different to just sit down and read a paper in whatever form that is. So I think scheduling it is really important too.
Being a little more intentional. Yeah, you're right, because conference is a little bit different, the talks, it's a social ad. It's not as focused as having a community dedicated to just talking about the literature. Yeah,
well, and the conferences will tell you what they want you to hear, right? And reading the literature is you go to the literature and read about the stuff that you want to learn about. And I've been to some talks that I wanted to learn about. Don't get me wrong, it's good information, but it's not that information, that I really need to be learning about.
Yeah, no, I completely understand.
Yeah.
What about you, Steve, from your experience? How does embedding that research literacy into training create stronger, more adaptable, I would say, practitioners?
Yeah. Well, I think it's very important to, when possible, to integrate that into the work environment. Like there's places I've worked at and now currently at BDS, we read an article regularly and discuss it. Us and the other BCBADs, and we do that every month. And another thing is, if you don't mind me doing a plug for Nicole's Journal Club series.
Yes.
And if you want to read an article and discuss it with somebody, check out our Journal Club series. And other, I'm glad to see that we're not the only ones doing that. I've seen some others pop up, and maybe they've started that because of you, Nicole.
Maybe,
So, we have to. Can you guys elaborate a little bit more? Because I know Steve gave the plug, but we want to give the full plug to our listeners. Can we talk a little bit about the Journal Club, what it is, how people are in it, and what you guys are doing with the Journal Club?
Sure. Yeah, it was silly that I missed that opportunity. Yes. One of the things that you could do is you could find ways to obtain CEUs by reading the literature. And that is one of the things that we really is the mission of the Journal Club series at BDS, is that Our customers get continuing education credit, which we all need to obtain to keep our certification, for reading the research and engaging in a discussion about it, and then taking a knowledge quiz. But the most value, I think, is that I don't know how else to talk about it, but the synthesis of, let's see what they did, and then what does it mean to you in your current setting. And I have met some amazing people on this journey, in all walks of life, doing all kinds of cool things with behavior analysis. To give an example or share a story, one of my customers was an applied animal behaviorist. She worked with birds, and often thought about, she would get her birds out of the cage by, offering a treat with, in her hand available or whatever. But she'd often thought about, I don't know if this bird is coming out for the treat as positive reinforcement or coming out to get out of the cage as negative reinforcement, right? But the fact that our journal club had the opportunity to hear about this positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement dichotomy in the context of a bird and a cage was just like, I could just see everyone kind of glowing and the gears turning, and just to hear from other people's perspectives and worldviews and experiences, and how they're applying this so cool technology and learning about the basic principles. I just think that makes you a better behavior analyst.
I love this. I love this so much. And I have to ask you, as you guys are in these journal clubs, as you guys are reading these journals, is there ever discourse in the way you guys are maybe interpreting the data, or somebody says, well, I would have done this differently? Is there ever any kind of, not tension, but is there ever any kind of like that critical thinking when you guys are looking at these journals?
Sure. There's often questions about, why do you think that the authors did it this way? And I'm not the author, so I don't know. We can only speculate. But yeah, there's often some constructive criticism that we could offer. I work really hard to connect the research to the practitioners, but I think I'd love to continue that loop and help the practitioners talk to the researchers and say, okay, I see why you did it this way, and I learned, but could you go back and do it just a little bit differently? Because when I apply it in schools, my administrators say I can't do it in such and such a way. Could we do it right? And I just think that the practitioners have a lot to teach our researchers about what else we need to study about the science.
One article we discussed not too long ago, we actually had the author join us. Yeah,
that's awesome.
And that was nice to have her perspective. And we did say before that meeting, well, this one will be a little bbit different than our usual ones because we can't be too critical. Not that we were going to be, but it's kind of interesting and fun and intellectually stimulating when after we've read these articles, we sit down and discuss them, and sometimes we all think the same, sometimes we think differently, and it just makes for a good discussion, particularly when we think differently, about an article, and it's when there's sort of a consensus on an article, then it's like it's sort of self-validating. When there's not that consensus, it's like you sometimes have learned something new. Oh yeah, I didn't look at it that way. But yeah, maybe that makes sense.
Yeah, that's cool. So, guys, and Steve talked about there are other journal clubs out there. I encourage you guys to maybe form some on your own as well, in your own communities, to evaluate the literature, to continue to talk about it, to keep yourself stimulated. All right, guys, so let's talk about tying this all together. Okay, so we know strong training builds the foundation. You guys have both spoke on that today, and research literacy fuels our growth. But how do we encourage practitioners and organizations to prioritize both? Okay, so I'm going to pose this question to both of you guys. Either one of you guys can take it. How do we get training programs, supervisors, organizations to foster a true culture of integrating research into our daily practice?
I think building that culture is really important. So being intentional about being a good example, setting a good example. Definitely, I think if you are supervising RBTs or if you are supervising fieldwork hours, you need to be modeling research literacy. You need to be, in your discussions, you need to be referring to where you're pulling this information from. Why do you feel so firmly about this? Oh, it's probably because of a talk that you went to or a paper that you read or a book that you looked at. And so just kind of modeling that for others, I think is really important. Show people how to find the literature when you're a BCBA and you don't have access to a university library anymore. Tell people about Google Scholar. It's okay. Or other resources that you use, and how do you stay in touch with the literature? What culture have you or community have you built for yourself that pushes you in your training and your quality, your quality clinical skills, if that's where you're at? What are you doing to push that in your own life, and hopefully that serves as a model for others.
Yeah, I love that. Anything you want to add to that, Steve?
Yeah, and if you're just starting your career, I would say make this part of the interview process. What do you do in your organization to set a strong culture of scholarship, and make that something that you give serious thought to if you want to work in an organization that doesn't do that. You're making a decision. If you decide to work in an organization that doesn't have a strong culture of scholarship, then you got to think about how that's going to impact you, not immediately, but 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. Many years ago, I toured the Carbone Clinic in New York, and he had people working for him who, they weren't BCBAs, they were just regular frontline staff, and they were using the terminology. They were talking about mans and tax and everything, just better than a lot of BCBAs. And I was so impressed with that, and I asked Vince about that. I said, it's really impressive how well your staff use the terminology and use it properly. And he said, yes, that's something that they really, really push and really encourage there. And so it was a value that he placed on the clinic, and that I think it really paid off.
Yeah.
And one other thing I notice, sometimes it's sort of funny, it's sort of disturbing. People will sometimes use behavioral lingo and use it incorrectly. Yeah. So I think about my response to it. But at other times it's like, with just a little bit more thought, you could use the right terminology. And if you're not sure what the right terminology is, then go back and do some self-study and think, now, how do I analyze that situation? What is the best, the proper terms or the proper conceptualization of this situation that I just described? But, of course, like I said, sometimes it could be just lighthearted. My wife refers to it as behaviorese. That's her term for the way. Well, actually, she was the editor of some of our content, not for content, but for grammar, because she's not trained as a behavior analyst, but she was learning behavior analysis as she was doing editing, and so she got a little bit used to it. And she says, "Is this supposed to read this way, or is this behaviorese?"
I'm gonna have to use that one.
Yeah, I like that. And she also will sometimes say, to this day, she'll say, "Are you trying to behavior me?" You know.
Mine says that all the time. Don't you go using that behavior stuff on me. But I'm not. I'm literally trying to have a conversation with you.
Right. Yeah.
Can I
Yeah, go ahead.
add? So we are at Texaba, which is a regional conference, and I just came back from the poster session, and it occurs to me that it might be cool for an organization to strive to put out one poster a year.
Oh, yeah.
Because I walked through the hall and it's all university programs, but there's nothing that says that your organization can't submit a poster. And I love the poster is very accessible. It's very informal, but it would force you to do a lit review to write the intro. It would force you to work through whatever research project you're working on, and you might have to read a little bit about the methodology that you choose. It would force you to synthesize it into a discussion, and what does this mean for us? What are the implications? And you might have to do a lit review to kind of make sure that you've got your T's crossed and your I's dotted and whatnot. Like, just start setting, little goals like that. If you attend a conference, then maybe work towards attending regularly. And then if you attend regularly, then work towards maybe one poster a year, for your organization.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
And that would be cool.
Guys, you're listening to Beyond the Science. This is a special edition of President's Corner, brought to you by Behavior Development Solutions. Now, we're here with Steve and Nicole, and I want to shift gears here a little bit and ask both of you guys a pretty serious question. I think Dr. Jim Carr gave us a stat recently and said 51%, if I'm getting this correctly, 51% of behavioral analysts have been in the field about 5 years.
Yeah, I think that's
which
right.
is a staggering
Yes. I've heard that stat. Yes.
Both of you guys have seen a lot. You guys have both been here in the field for a while. I'm curious to get you guys' take. And Steve, I want to go to you first on this. Do you have any concerns, or just can you speak about the state of our field, where it's been, and where you would like to see it go maybe in the next 10 years? And based off of everything that you've seen and what you're doing, can you speak on that for our listeners who are just seeing the state of our field?
Let me begin with a historical perspective. When I was a young grad student, my first, several years at ABAI, I remember one of those years, I think there were 700 people at ABAI, and they were so amazed at how many people that was, And there was, I know FOB existed. I guess Texaba existed because this year they're celebrating their 40th. And Babbitt existed, but there wasn't a whole lot of state organizations that existed. So the field was small. It was, probably, I would guess 500, not more than 1,000, mostly academics working in universities, teaching Skinner, and other basic behavioral principles. And it was very hopeful. It was not focused on autism or even other developmental disabilities. Yeah, that was part of it, but it wasn't the overwhelming portion of it. I mean, we talked about all kinds of different social issues. Skinner talked about those, and it was, it was the discipline that was going to save the world in 10 years, or 20 years. That's how, at least my perception as a young, wide-eyed graduate student. It was also largely male. And it was kind of like that until the autism epidemic hit. And then all of a sudden you had a focus on autism treatment, and you had a lot of women coming into the field. And then I'd say gradually we've kind of shifted a little bit more towards not so much behavior analysts, but behavioral technicians as a field, where we're just implementing protocols that are kind of a bag of tricks, if you will, as opposed to really being able to analyze the contingencies that exert control over behavior. Of course, my hope is that we get back to more of an analytic bent, and we focus more on foundational principles and basic principles of behavior analysis, that we get better at doing that as a field, and I think that'll happen. If you think about 51% of the people being in the field 5 years or less, meaning we are a young field. It's just that we have a whole lot of inexperienced people in the field. It's a bad thing in the sense of we don't have a whole lot of experienced people, but those people will become experienced. And I heard Jim Carr say a year or two ago, I think it was probably 2 years ago, he said that, our goal is to support, or one of our goals is to support these newer and experienced people coming into the field and who are new in the field, while also increasing the standards, and which is going toward this accreditation. That's all VCSs will become accredited programs in, I believe it's 2032. So we're increasing the standards, at least on paper. It's coming, by 2032, and will all the university programs rise to meet that new standard? I don't know. We'll see. But I'm pretty happy with the board that there's at least setting those standards.
I appreciate you sharing that, and that's a good historical lesson for us too. For many people who don't know the history behind, and my mentor talks about that too. I feel like initially, Steve, there was this hope and this optimism and this energy around what we could be. Everybody was putting out this literature and this skin and all. Just those forefathers that were just, man, we're gonna save the world here, and it's, maybe quite hasn't been that, But I like your optimism for, saying, hey, we're going to continue to get more experience. And then as they get more experience, hopefully we can kind of get back to the foundation of our science. So I appreciate you sharing that.
I wonder what the average, years in the science was of the people that attended ABAI when there were 700 people, right? I wonder how...
Oh, yeah.
How...
Staggering difference.
Yeah, right. And that makes a difference, right? They've been seeing the principles in action for a very, very long time, and came together and said, we need to build a community where we can share and we can learn from one another and we can continue to build. And because our field is now so new, or such a huge proportion of the people coming into the field don't have that longevity, if you will, or whatever it is, the wisdom and the experience that comes from being in a field for a really long time. We're just faced with a different type of population.
Yeah, and if you think about that, it's quite amazing that even though we've been aggressively training BCBAs for the last 20 years, still most of them are real young.
Yes.
So, and I don't think, unless things have changed in the last few years, we haven't had a large attrition rate. So I think this big surge of young people is due to the growth of programs, not to people dropping out of the field.
Interesting.
Right. Right.
I mean, I remember in the early aughts, I guess it was, or the mid-aughts, that Jim Johnson made a statement about, looking at the growth of BCBAs, and it's like, yeah, we're gonna have, in a few years, we're gonna have 10,000 BCBAs. And we were, yeah, that's right, and that seemed like such a big number then.
Yes.
But I guess, in the early part of the field, or the let's say since 2000 roughly, the field has been growing exponentially.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite exponentially, but close to exponentially.
Yes.
And so, I've been saying this for a few years, but I think it's going to start to level out some.
You think so? So,
Well,
I'll tell you my take on it, Steve.
Okay.
It's hard for me to have the level of optimism you necessarily have because I see on a day-to-day basis, like, not that private equity is bad or anything like that, but I feel like when insurance came in and the motivation, the MO now is a little bit different. So now that that's different, I don't see the shift necessarily that you're talking about getting back there, because now the incentive, we're incentivizing and the motivation is different to put numbers out. It's more of a numbers game now. So I really struggle with having that optimism, even though I would like to have it. It's just, I see it and I don't see that necessarily improving right now. And I think that part needs to be addressed because the function has changed now. So I think that is a state of our field that we need to talk about to get back to that place.
Yeah, I agree. And don't mistake my hope for optimism.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful.
Okay. That's good.
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. But this is a really good conversation, guys. You need to have more conversations like this. And I appreciate you guys, taking some time out to, share some gems with us as we wind down here and we close down. And I'm going to give it to both of you guys. If you could leave one message, a lot of our listeners are up and coming techs and early BCBAs as well. If you could just leave one message with some of our early on BAs that are in the field, what would both of you guys say to them?
Okay, I'll throw something out here, and this is sort of I got to put begin with a pessimistic note, unfortunately, and that is, we have a lot of changes going on in the country, and I don't know what this is. Where this is going. I don't think anybody does as far as where we're going economically. We could be coming into a big recession. Hopefully we're not. We don't know what's going to happen with Medicaid funding, with school funding and so on. So it's possible that we're going to have a contraction of the field. And so how do we respond to that? Well, we got to just buckle down and we got to, continue on and do the best we can. And we got to be the best we can. We have to, like I was saying earlier, if you're the BCBA in the meeting, you got to be the smartest person in the room. You got to be the one that's going to, carry the day when, they're short-staffed or whatever, and you got to have the good ideas and ideas to make things more efficient and more effective. So my answer is we got to be the best we can.
I love it. Nicole.
Okay, I think my gem is taking from what BDS has taught me about a concept analysis. I think about the concept of behavior analysis and remember that there are critical features and there are variable features. And I think the population that we work with is variable. I think that our funders are variable. I think our principles and our laws are critical. Mm-hmm. And if you're gonna be a behavior analyst for the long term, I think you've got to make sure that you have a good understanding of those critical features because the variable features will change. Yeah. I think that's what we've decided, right? The field is going to change. So if you can decipher between the two, I think you'll be better off long term.
Yeah. Wow. I love it. I love it, guys. Well, guys, thank you so much for taking some time out. Texas ABA, I know we talked about having this conversation for a little bit now, and I think our listeners got a lot of gems and a lot of nuggets from it. So huge shout out to Stephen and Nicole for joining us on such a meaningful conversation on the special edition of President's Corner. Also have to give a final shout out to Behavior Development Solutions for presenting this episode today. If you guys are serious about becoming the best practitioner you can be, whether you're a student, whether you're a supervisor, a lifetime learner, BDS has a resource to help get you there. Please visit bds.com and check out everything they have to offer. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today, being part of this conversation. I hope you guys learned some new things. So our listeners, you guys stay curious, stay in the literature, continue to learn more about our field, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.